I'm Chris Baines. I'm an independent environmentalist and I've been involved with urban nature conservation all my adult life. I started really because I was trained as a horticulturalist and a landscape architect and was doing fairly ordinary stuff, housing schemes, school grounds schemes, working a lot in the Middle East. This was way back in the 1970s, but also working in the middle of the city in really difficult housing areas in Brixton and Toxteth and Hackney. And there was a moment in the beginning of the 1980s where everywhere I worked there were riots. But I was working with kids in particular, just engaging their attention really by getting them to grow things, to plant things, to engage with the very local green space. And a great moment for me was at the end of the Brixton riots when everything had been trashed and the Tulse Hill Nature Garden that I'd been working on for 2 or 3 years with the local kids wasn't touched by anybody. The sunflowers were still standing. And I suppose at that point I knew that people really valued nature, even if they didn't necessarily know how to articulate that. And that was something I'd always felt, of course. You know, I grew up with a dad who was a primary school teacher who had nature tables, and you know, that whole background was part of my life. But I think increasingly, and it's become stronger and stronger, there's a realization that actually the antidote to the stressfulness of urban living is to actually have some breathing space, have a green space you can step out into. And over the last 10 or 15 years particularly, as that's been taken more seriously, it's been backed by really significant sound science, so that now we can demonstrate, you can measure the reduction in stress levels. If you take somebody from a stressful situation out into a park or a garden or a green courtyard, within 3 to 4 minutes you can measure the drop in the tension in the muscles across their forehead, their pulse rate slows. And so much illness, mental and physical illness, is related to stress that clearly there are all kinds of very valuable reasons to society for making sure everybody has that kind of access. I think the nature of the challenge has always been to persuade the people with real power to take it seriously as a part of using their power. I've never been in any doubt that, you know, the head of the biggest corporation doing the most damage will have grandkids that he loves to actually, or she loves to take out into nature, or loves the garden, or chooses to live in the leafiest of suburbs. So it's the mismatch that's critical. And I guess that's got easier, no more effective probably, but easier because I think the environmental movement has understood that that's where the discussion needs to be. And I think we have learned 2 things. One is that we need to go where they are listening, rather than try and drag them to where we are shouting from. And I think we also have got very much better at compromise. And I think in a society where 90% of us live in urban areas, of all the people on the earth today, 1 in 100 live in the British Isles, half the world's population is urban now. We live in a world where compromise is crucial. And although, you know, I go to the stake to protect particular sites and particular species, I actually think the vast majority of the time you get a very much better result by engaging and having a creative conversation, and ideally tapping into the skills and expertise and resources of the other people in the conversation. We'll always be the poor relation in terms of finance, but we don't necessarily have to be the poor relation in terms of ideas, and I think sharing and coming up with better compromise solutions is probably getting easier as we all learn how to do it. One of the most exciting things most recently is that I've been working with Thames Water in central London on the ecological spin out from building this super sewer, this huge £4.5 billion pipe under the River Thames. And the reason that's been so exciting is that it began with me being commissioned to chair a group of ecologists to talk about how to compensate for the collateral damage of all this construction. In fact, because we had a conversation which included ecologists and the engineers and the economists and government departments and so on, we've come up with a much more creative outcome, which is that actually, as well as cleaning up the pollution in the river by building this super sewer, it's become clear that actually the structures which were seen as a threat to the river may be the key to increasing the chance of fish fry migrating up the river. And quite a lot of the commercial fish fry in the Thames estuary need to get up to fresh water as a part of their life cycle. This is things like sea bass and Dover sole. They do that by riding on the rising tide. It takes them about 12 days to get up to the fresh water. And when they get to the middle of London, there's nowhere to hang on when the tide goes back out again. And by building these structures in a different kind of way, so that they provide lots of shelter, it's going to be easier for millions and millions of fish fry to make that life-saving journey up the river on the back of the rising tide. Now, I don't think we would have come up with that kind of solution had we not had the engineers and the fish ecologists in the room together talking creatively. And we certainly couldn't have delivered it had we not had the scale of financial investment that comes through that kind of industrial infrastructure.